numbers related to how much is going directly to higher ed and how much is going to states. So, and then the state revenue, I've got the comptroller's current estimates through March, not estimates, but what they're actually collecting. And then links to the actual text of Senate Bill 944 and the bill analysis of Senate Bill 944 that we're going to talk about, and a Q&A from the Texas Municipal League related to Senate Bill 944. So use it as you see fit, Katie, in terms of reference and discussion, but I just sent you that email with all of those links on it.
Okay.
So
It didn't let me do a notes on it. Let me try and do that now.
okay.
But we are live.
What's that?
We are live now.
Outstanding.
So can you see how many people we have?
Right now, I think we have one, me.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's give it at least until 2, let people show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am hoping in this that the attendees will chime in about what they're doing at their college. It's a little bit of a challenge because people often get incomplete information, or things change, so we need to kind of verify the feedback we get, but it can at least give us some heads up that there's something to follow up on.
Yeah, it's also tricky. Sort of the last blanket statement out of the higher ed coordinating board that I can find is that institutions need to make these choices. That's sort of the overall thing. That higher ed coordinating board has a pretty robust page that says here's everything that's happened, but it kind of ends around March 25th in terms of what's actually, that's when colleges were making varying decisions, and they were trying to figure out how to get spring break, whether they're going to start up after spring break, I guess. So really the institutions seem to be under the boundaries of the governor's order. The institutions are making their decisions about what they're doing. The question I have, Richard, is whether or not yesterday the public education made the pronouncement that they'll continue with their concept of formula funding, which is different than ours. It's the average daily attendance concept. So it's sort of an ongoing thing and can actually move during this, on a weekly or daily basis. And what they've decided to do with regard to formula funding is they're saying if you're making progress with feedback in distance learning, you'll get your AD. We were not going to take attendance anymore. You'll just get the average ADA that you had been receiving before.
Oh, wow.
And so because they can't count kids and they can't, they're in all kinds of problems because they also can't, because they're not geared to distance learning nearly so much as we are. They also can't require attendance to distance learning because they don't know what the inequities are out there. And so the net result is they just have to show an effort. I say they have to show an effort. They have to have a cogent plan for being online with kids and getting feedback from kids to advance learning. And I haven't seen anything like that in higher ed yet, any sort of pronouncement like that and I'm not sure that I would from Harrison. But the assumption is that we continue with our formula funding pattern now, to the end of the semester, and then the summer and fall will be a work in progress.
Yeah, because we go with enrollments and we're in a base year now.
Right.
So we don't see the fluctuations that they see in K-12. Right. But we do need to be able to calculate enrollments, but it's not based on attendance.
Yeah, I'll probably bring that up just to inoculate against confusion. Just to say there is an issue in PubEd, but it shouldn't have an impact on us at this point. Our formula will be, as you say, enrollment based, not ADA based. But if you hear something out there about a requirement, be advised this is what they're saying to public ed, and they may be talking about that in your like dual credit spaces, stuff like that.
Okay. Well, listen, why don't we, it's just after 2. Why don't we go ahead and get started? We're recording this, so we'll put it out to the world as a recording afterwards for people who can't make it today. But I would like to go ahead and get started and just begin the conversation. There's a lot happening right now around the world, nationally, in Texas, at our institutions, and it's an awful lot to keep up with. I think we've been hearing a lot about what's happening in DC and how the federal government is choosing to respond. And then there are some statewide information that we get around New York, some California, Washington. I haven't been hearing that much about what's happening in Texas, and there's a lot happening. And so I think that's what we want to bring everybody up to speed on today. Beeman Floyd is with us. He is the lobbyist that works with us on public policy issues at the Capitol, and is the most informed person I know on many of these topics. So we wanted to talk with Beeman about what he's hearing, what people at the Capitol are saying, and what will be important for our folks to know. Before we get started, though, I do want to point out that TCCTA is involved in a number of initiatives that we've just launched in the last, over the last month. We've been putting these programs together. We will be having a series of conversations like this one on a variety of topics, including best practices in online instruction. We'll have a panel talking about that, what's working and what you might want to think about in your classroom and in your program. Luella Tate from Austin Community College will be talking about the role of empathy and genuine connection with your students and with your colleagues around the state. Those kinds of connections are feeling especially strained right now as we're all working from home and not able to connect in person the way we're used to, which makes it more difficult to do and makes the need for it feel more urgent because of its absence. So that I think is going to be a very important discussion, and I hope you can join us for that. Another thing we're going to be doing, and I believe this is probably the most important thing TCCTA will be doing for the foreseeable future. Every May, we host our Great Teaching Roundup, which is, it's a small event for maybe 30 people, 25, 30 people, master teacher seminar, 3 days of teachers getting together and talking about what's working, what's not working, their successes and their challenges. It is a powerful experience to just get faculty together, talking with each other. There are no speakers that come in. We don't have PowerPoint presentations, that kind of thing. The attendees are the program, and it is a very transformative experience for the people who attend it. We've had to cancel it this year because of the COVID-19 crisis, but what we're doing is we're moving it online, and we're going to be having a large number of these small group, 10 people or fewer online groups doing these master teacher seminars. I hope that you as a member of TCCTA will sign up for one of these and join with your colleagues from around the state for these real in-depth discussions. This will be different from other things you might be getting now, which are kind of factoid updates. Here's some information that you're getting from AACC or some other organization, or even this organization. This is different. This really is diving deep into the experience that you're having as a teacher, the challenges that you're facing, and finding ways to support each other. So please be looking for that. We'll be sending out, Katie will be sending out an update to the faculty fellows immediately following this program. So be looking for that email. Go to the TCCTA website and find one of those sessions and sign up right away. We'll be getting those programs started next week. So just want to make sure you knew about that. We'll be sending out more information in the future. So now, Beeman, I'd like to talk with you about what's happening statewide at the policy level and otherwise. around the coronavirus crisis and how Texas is responding to it and the implications for community colleges. But why don't we just start with a broad overview? What is Texas and what is the governor's office doing in response to COVID-19?
Well, the short answer and a sort of important understanding of this thing is everything that is being done by the governor's office. You and I were chatting, and you said in the intro of this thing, what am I hearing at the Capitol? The answer is nothing, and I'm hearing nothing because the Capitol is closed in an unprecedented way. That's certainly unique in my experience. The Capitol is closed and locked up, and visitors not allowed. There isn't anybody up there. What is interesting about this crisis generally is that we have a pretty robust emergency management concept here in Texas. We have a big emergency management center, a special operations center that we've got. We've got a group called the Texas Division of Emergency Management. It's a division of the governor's office that's strong. It has a lot of resources and it has a lot of people. But the general concept of a natural disaster or catastrophe is that it happens in one place and not everywhere at once. And so part of what the challenge for Texas in this thing has been systematically facing this issue as a state at the same time that offices have been closing down in sequence all over the state. Obviously, there are critical operations of government that are up and running. We're going to talk about a bunch of those today. But I would say that it is instructive and useful for the citizens of Texas to know that whatever their feelings about the response are and whatever their feelings are about the completeness of the response, everybody's trying, and it's a really, really difficult situation.
Now, I know the governor has issued some orders around the state around travel, things like that. What are you seeing in that respect, especially with regard to the implications for what's going on at our colleges?
Right. The big order that was issued is Executive Order 14. This was there were several orders in advance of that, and we finally got to that point in Order 14, and that is the one that's the statewide shelter-in-place order. It defines various things as essential businesses. Education is is part of that definition to a degree, though we are encouraged to do everything that we can via the internet and distance learning. There's an expectation that we're going to do precisely what most of our institutions are doing now, which is continue what we're doing, but do it via our distance learning infrastructure and create create as much new infrastructure as we can in this context. But we, all of us and all of you individually, faculty fellows and TCCTA members, are definitely caught up in the general shelter-in-place order, where you can make your evaluations about what constitutes an essential business or activity, but in general, the world has moved home. And our institutions are expected to be operating, but they are expected to be operating in a distance learning format with absolute minimum of face-to-face contact and travel.
Well, I know at the kind of early days in all this, colleges were saying we're going to extend spring break a little bit. We will be going back on campus later, but I think everybody was just figuring it out. I think since then, there's some uniformity around the state, largely around the governor's order, that has us all working from home.
Right, and an important part of what the governor's order GA 14 does is it supersedes previous orders. Explicitly, it says that it has become the sort of central focus, and then the local jurisdictions, including community college districts, are working in the context of GA 14 at this point. And GA 14 is a shelter in place to April 30th with an option to extend. So anything that you might see, and there are some of the resources out there talk about schools returning by a date certain. those have been rendered obsolete. That's just changes that need to be made to databases. There are not colleges that have gone back to face-to-face classes because of the general state order that we're working under right now.
Now, I know that TACC, Texas Association of Community Colleges, has a page on their website with updates as they're coming across them. The coordinating board has its information. Where would you recommend one of our members go to get the latest on these developments?
Yeah, I think the TACC website's a good resource. It's got a host of connections. Again, my caveat there would be that there are some Excel spreadsheet databases on that site that talk about individual college responses that have not been updated in my last look at it, which was this morning, since like March 25th. So there may be some, it's not that the information is wrong, it's that it could be obsolete. Events have overtaken. And guess what? TACC's building is closed, and they're all working from home too. And so it's, everybody's struggling to stay, completely up to date. But if you look at the TACC website, it's got a host of information. It has a link to the Higher Ed Coordinating Board page, which has essentially the same issue that the TACC page has, in that it has been it was updated about 8 or 9 days ago and hasn't been updated since then. But these things are important. These are good general resources about what's going on. Really, the best place to go, frankly, is the Office of the Governor, because these things are happening so fast and happening in real time, and then the rest of the apparatus of government is catching up with these decisions that are being made in real time in the governor's office. That, again, that information is not specifically targeted to higher education, but is relevant to citizens of Texas for sure, and as such is relevant to state agencies, public entities. And so a lot of times the first thing you get is from there, and then you sift out the details of it in the other agency spaces.
We'll put a link up to that in the comments section. So if you have trouble finding it, just look in the comments. We'll get them up there shortly. I would say the number one question I'm hearing from faculty around the state is what this means for classes this summer and next fall. Will we be teaching online? Will classes be open? Is this going to continue on through next fall semester? What do you say to that question?
I say be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the daily briefings at the federal level, that's where it's happening. When you see Dr. Fauci, the celebrated now Dr. Fauci, get up and talk about June and July and second waves, you see other people in the federal administration talk about varying dates. What you're really seeing, we know what you're really seeing, is we just don't know. That everybody's reading granular data on a daily basis to try to figure out the trend. And the trend, as Dr. Fauci put it rather famously, it's the virus is creating headlines. I paraphrase, but that the virus and its movement
sets the timetable. Yeah.
To create the timetable, right? And so my advice to anybody who public, private, whatever, just to the general citizenry of Texas in general, and to us in particular, in terms of trying to plan a summer semester, is just think in terms of flexibility, because there's absolutely no way to know right now whether the summer semester is going to make what it's going to look like, what enrollments will look like in that space.
Well, now, speaking of enrollments, there are some implications for our funding. I mean, we'll be dealing with a base year where our enrollments are calculated, and our funding from the state is based on the formula that derives from that. What are you hearing about the impact of enrollments, how we count these things, and the implications for how we're funded?
Well, we, again, it is hard to say. What we do know is that there are a couple of different tranches of funding, money, that are involved in the CARES Act, in the big act you may have seen that was passed on April 1st.
Mhm.
This is the thing with the four-part, potentially over time, the four-part series of funding, the $2 trillion plan that everybody's read about. There's a bunch of that is actually specific to colleges, like specific to higher ed. I think higher ed has in excess of $12 billion associated with, committed in the act. I'm just pulling that up right here. Yeah, there's a $12.5 billion are going directly to higher ed institutions. There is an immensely complicated formula. But as part of the calculation of that, there are calculations for each individual institution in Texas about how much money they might get of that $12.5 billion. And again, we have some websites that we can throw up there that show those calculations. They calculate them for every institution in the United States. And however, again, the caveat is that you will see a very specific dollar amount with all the footnotes that say, I don't know, because
Subject to change, yes.
it's really complicated. My favorite quote, and I again, is this a banker who said, "We're trying to build the space shuttle while we're hurtling toward Mars." That we got a whole bunch of money, and they said, "Get it out there and get it out systematically and with controls and accountability," and we have no idea how to do it.
And do it yesterday. Yeah. Yeah. So now that's federal money. I'm wondering, what about state money and the way it's calculated? I know we were talking earlier about K-12 and how their funding is based on attendance. Ours is based on enrollments. But do you see any impact of all this on how our state dollars are calculated?
No, well, the impact would be a long-term calculation based on base year enrollments. Mm-hmm. And so because we sort of set our funding pattern, our funding level kind of once in a given time period, we shouldn't be affected. We're in the base year budget. There's money that has been budgeted unless the state's checks start to bounce. Our funding is there. There's a commitment to it through the appropriations process that we went through in the last legislative session, 2019. That being said, we don't know how this virus is going to affect everything going forward. We don't know whether massive unemployment will lead to massive enrollment in our institutions, or whether a massive lack of funds that people have will lead to less people out there trying to scratch around and get whatever jobs they can. We don't know. What we do know is that the federal government anticipates a direct impact on higher education and has made allowances for that in the federal bill directly to the colleges. We also know, and this is an interesting part of the CARES Act as we understand it at this point. And again, they're creating rules and mechanisms around it even as we speak. Yeah. There's also money that goes directly to states. Texas is going to receive around $12 billion of the stimulus, which comports with the amount of stimulus going to states and our population. So it's a population-based formula. We have about $4 billion of that $12 billion going to local jurisdictions, that's cities and counties, and then $8 billion going directly to the state in the context of direct state aid for budgetary issues and potential budget shortfalls and what they're spending on the coronavirus itself. Okay. So and there's not an offset at this point, and there is not any kind of offset between the state aid that's going to the state and the institutional aid that's going to the institution. So an institution could conceivably receive its direct money from the CARES Act and then subsequently receive money from the state as well in the form of the budget that we've already passed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So looking forward, so there's the way it's calculated, and it looks like that won't be affected unless our enrollments are affected during the base year, but it won't get the same sort of implications that public ed gets. And so our members, if they're seeing things on the news about average daily attendance and that kind of thing, should understand that that is a K-12 specific phenomenon. Don't see that as talking about community
Right,
college.
and I think it's important to note, for especially since we do work quite closely with public ed in dual credit courses and other things.
Mhm.
You will see public ed, what the commissioner of public education has said, Mike Morath has said, we are not going to be calculating funding on ADA. We're going to be calculating funding on you establishing some kind of distance learning paradigm for your students that includes relevant feedback from the students. So what PubEd is saying in essence is create distance learning.
Do your best.
Do your best. That the accountability structure for it is going to be sort of aspirational, but not, an accountability, not a true thing. And we will fund you in the context of your ADA calculations from the past. But when you hear that, you may hear something about some sort of relevance or some sort of criteria for getting the funding. That's not us. That's PubEd.
Okay, so it's important for our members to understand, because of our partnerships with K-12, but understand we're talking about different stream of money and the way we're funded. Yeah. Now, you mentioned this federal money coming in, some of that going into state coffers and flowing from that to the agencies. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about what we're looking at in the state budget. What might be the big drivers for whether we're doing well or whether we're struggling. I mean, I'm thinking about, for instance, the rainy day fund is something you can hardly end a sentence without mentioning these days when you're talking about the state budget. There's the price of oil, which just at the same time we're going through COVID-19, we're also dealing with plummeting oil prices. What would you see are the big drivers for the state budget in this moment?
Well, I mean, if you look at all of the receipts from the state, it's kind of interesting. And it's interesting if you're a nerdy geek who likes to look at tax receipts, but it's, but if you, and we can give a link to the controller's real-time reporting on the tax receipts. They do a monthly update where they talk about the actual numbers that they've collected. Right now, the state is actually up 8.8% in its tax collections because we've had a great growth economy, and this sort of Texas boom has continued. But all of those leading indicators turned down in March. And when I say all, I mean all. Sales tax revenue and motor fuels taxes and fees for services, which are included in those receipts, the oil severance tax, everything turned down, and it's just a few percentage points. But what you're seeing, I mean, obviously, if you're basically looking at the mid-March term, and what will be really interesting and telling is going to be what April looks like. We are very vulnerable to this because we are a state that is built on, in terms of our state taxes, and this does not include property tax, which are not state taxes; those are local subdivision taxes. Our state is really built on commerce, and it's built on this concept of buying and selling and traveling and yanking oil out of the ground, and all of those things are really under a tremendous amount of pressure. And if I can I say something specific about the oil severance tax?
Sure.
The oil severance tax is a big deal. What's happening in the severance tax, which is about oil and natural gas and our general extraction of minerals from the ground. What is happening there is entirely unrelated to COVID. It is about a fight between Russia and Saudi Arabia where the normal controls on production that set the price of oil around the world have gone completely by the wayside because Saudi Arabia got really mad at Russia and decided to just absolutely over pump and fill up the world with abundant cheap oil, which Saudi Arabia can do. They've got enough oil and enough, and this is the big economics of oil, and we all, know about those and read about them from time to time. And it's coincidental that we think it's coincidental that this thing happened, at the outset of this COVID crisis. But the reason it's important, it's important for a couple of reasons. One is the oil severance tax is one of those things that feeds our general fund. And two is the oil severance tax is the thing that feeds the rainy day fund. And three, the price of oil plus or minus $50 creates the business climate that determines whether fracking, which is a lot of what we do here, hydraulic fracturing of oil, a lot of the way, is kind of expensive to do. The price of oil is over $50 a barrel. It's cost effective to do that. If it's under $50 a barrel, it's not. And you fire everybody, lay everybody off from the oil patch and just wait. And so outside of the whole COVID issue, we were going to have a problem with the severance tax. And that problem was going to manifest in the direct collection of the tax itself, employment and sales taxes related to oil and oil field activity, and the charging up of the rainy day fund. All three of those things are in a very hazardous state right now because oil was riding around 26 or 27 when I checked it today. It's a long way from 50.
And where are we on the rainy day fund going into all that, or let's say going into next legislative session? I mean, everybody's going to try and stake a claim on it. How much are we talking about?
Well, we don't know. I mean, here's the interesting thing, and this is another sort of a little bit of a cruel irony of this thing. The legislature did the public school finance reform last year and actually saw fit to cut loose of some of the rainy day fund. It's been an embarrassment of riches for Texas for a long time because we've had some needs in Texas. We've had this big rainy day fund, and we've said, why do we treat this thing sort of almost as an idol, and we don't want to spend money out of it when sometimes the money needs to be spent? Well, the Texas legislature evaluated the need and listened to the citizens and said, okay, we're going to do this for public ed. And so they actually spent money out of it and created an ongoing expense related to public education and the increases to public ed last session. And this happened. So, this is what we have about $9 billion, I guess, in the rainy day fund. I'd have to go back and check that figure with precision since the expenditures in the last legislative session. The rainy day fund's never allowed to have more than 10% of the general appropriations bill. That's kind of that's the statutory rule. You have to start spending it if it goes above 10% of it. So it's supposed to be a savings account of 10% of our normal yearly expenditures. But in conversations that I've been in the past 15 days, I've heard that $9 billion gets spent, I don't know, about $108 billion worth. that there's nobody in the state that doesn't want a piece of that rainy day fund right now. And so I would say to rely on it in the context of us thinking we're going to get a bunch of it, like a high percentage of dollars out of the rainy day fund, there may be sort of a pro rata distribution out of it to help everybody a little bit, but I don't think anybody has the big corner on the rainy day fund. There's going to be a lot of need there.
Well, and it's an easy thing to point to and say, oh, well, we've got that. But I think we all need to keep in mind, keep it in proportion to what the need is going to be. And thinking in those, well, actually, I want to follow up on that. But first, I want to circle back to a question. Megan Johnson was, when we were talking about higher ed, was making the point about dual credit and the impact that this might have on dual credit. She specifically mentions using the Texas Virtual School Network directly in the future. I have not heard any efforts to do that so far. Have you heard anything on that?
No, I haven't. What I have heard that's a little bit related to that question is not an answer to that question, but speculation about whether or not there are going to be unintended consequences about what happens here. Again, that's an interesting idea, and maybe one of the things that happens. We don't know. What we do know is that there's going to be a big after action report on all of this, and one of the things that has been speculated that I have heard is, will we wind up going to a 4-day school week out of this, and have 1 week virtual? If we have all these virtual systems that are created out of necessity, and it winds up working for a broad swath of pub ed, or pub ed starts to leverage other people's abilities and infrastructures for this thing, will we come back and look at this and say, COVID showed us that, fill in the blank?
Well, and I'm hearing in a lot of different contexts that schools are being extremely flexible, and I think in many ways in some very positive directions. But we're finding out there are things that maybe we should have been doing all along, and it was this crisis that forced us to try something new. And I would expect this time next year we will be doing a lot of things that came up out of this this difficult moment, because it worked better, and we figured out new ways of doing things. Some of them are just going to be triage and let's just get through this crisis, but some of them I think might be genuine improvements, and I hope we're all looking for those things so that we can capture them as we come across them.
Well, and I think that's that's actually an important thing to talk about with everybody, with our entire membership, and certainly with Faculty Fellows Group. And that is that as you know more about this than anybody. We say this to you in a lot of ways, in a lot of the stuff that we talk about. We know what's coming out of the governor's office and stuff. What we don't know is how well all of that comports with your on the ground reality of what's going on. And that's really vital. The movement of information both ways in this thing is very vital. And as we go through this, there will be a lot of people who say, we were in this just big catastrophe, and we found this cache of silver bullets, by accident. This thing happened, and there was a big earthquake, and the tomb opened up, and there was the treasure. And that may or may not be true. And we will be relying on you to tell us whether that's true or not.
And part of the challenge in that, I think, is going to be how we discover it, because if that kind of thing will largely happen in isolation, which is wonderful that situation got addressed. But if we can spread the word about it, then it really gets powerful. And to go back to those meetups that I was talking about at the top of this, I think that's going to be an important way that we find out what people are experiencing and learning as we go. We'll be collecting information from the facilitators as these discussions happen, and we'll be asking them what new ideas are emerging out of this that your peers around the state want to know. So that can be a positive that comes out of a very difficult experience.
Well, and I think it's important to ask people to note things both ways. Mm-hmm. Tell us what's working and tell us what doesn't work. Yeah. Tell us what's real medicine and what's a placebo, to make a medical metaphor, in our operations and the adjustments that we have made to this. Because a lot of people will be having great ideas after all this is over, and our job will be to sift out and figure out which ones are actually great, and without rancor, or without telling people, wow, that idea was really stupid. But there will be plenty, if this follows the normal pattern of things in public affairs, there will be people who say one person did one thing and everybody should be doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm.
And we need to be able to know, to say that was a cautionary example, not one we should.
We need to be able to do both, right? We need to be able to say, yeah, this never would have happened without the extremity of the emergency. And we have, it's like World War II was terrible and we got penicillin out of it and lots of other things, as well. And it may well be that we really learn something from the extremity of our situation right now, but we need to know that it's really something. And which means that everybody should kind of be thinking thoughtfully about documenting what's going on and taking notes about what's going on and what really works and what really doesn't work. And that's going to be a huge data set for us as professionals and us as a state to compile and maybe really be able to do something. But we want it to be a real thing.
And I think that's why coming out of these faculty discussions is going to be important in that. This isn't somebody coming with an agenda who's just trying to be an agent of change that doesn't really care at the front end whether it was a good idea or not. Let's just shake things up. This will be faculty saying, we're doing this at my college and it really is an improvement. We're doing this at my college and it's causing us to struggle. This is not working out the way we'd hoped. And that kind of candor can be really helpful.
Well, and I will say this, and I've been accused of being the most Pollyanna lobbyist in Texas before, so take this for what it's worth. But I've just been amazed at the quality of some of the work that I've seen of people really being inventive and flexible and solving problems across a variety of spaces. I am comforted by the spirit of the people that we work with, particularly in the educational spaces, where they're saying it's so can do. It's okay. Let's figure out how to do this thing and do it. And it's also really a confirmation that the vast majority of the people who are in this space are there because they love it and they want to do it and they want to do it right. It's not just a job, and it's a great thing to see, really.
Let's step back a little bit, and I'm trying to imagine next January we go into the legislative session. All of this will be passed, or we're dealing with another wave of it. We don't know, but there we are going to the legislature, presumably with some sort of a budget crisis because of the things that we've been talking about. What should we be doing now as institutions, as faculty, to prepare us to make the case in January for the legislative support so that we can get out of whatever economic crisis we're in come January?
Well, I mean, that's the easiest question I'll get today. Do what you do.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, what a softball. Thanks, man. It's do what you do, which is you all are the solution, right? You are where medical professionals, you're the solution in a very specific set of ways. You're where workforce development comes from. You're where job retraining comes from. You're where medical professionals come from. That case is super easy to make. That we're going to see some things that are pretty interesting. We're going to see a whole bunch of unemployed people that need to figure out how to get new jobs and maybe having to switch fields or careers. And you are that. We already have this issue, and the governor has made emergency proclamations related to getting the students that you're teaching up and operating before they have passed their licensing exams, because they have faith that you have taught them well enough to do this thing. And we're going to have to go through the normalization and reevaluate. It's going to be a weird thing that you're going to have nurses who've been on the job for 3 months who then have to go back and take a job to get licensed, or take an exam to get licensed. Maybe we're going to figure out what happens in that space, right? But so there's the direct stuff that you all do, and then there's the no less important general thing. I shouldn't say direct and indirect. I should say specific and general, right? There are the specific things, and then there's the general thing of lifting the educational attainment in any particular space in Texas, and doing it with great value. Keep doing what you're doing. I think the argument is and will, I won't say it will make itself, we have to advance it, right? But it's all the message points are there, in what we're doing and how we do it and how we have always done these things. I mean, we're leaders in open source materials and online education, like big giant leaders in that. And so it's and we're leaders in the very things that have suddenly become critical to the state. And so we just need to keep doing our thing.
Well, 80-something% of all the nurses in Texas come out of community colleges. Same for firefighters and EMT specialists. That, yeah, I kind of see us as the solution both for the health crisis that we're in and for the economic crisis that we're facing. If you're looking to solve either of those, you're gonna find it at community colleges.
And when you talk about the dawn of the legislative session, it's a peculiar thing when you work in, because we have a biennial legislature here. We have all kinds of examples of this. When, you know, Hurricane Harvey happened in the early fall of 2017, right after a legislative session, and then we were 20 months out from Hurricane Harvey when we went back into the legislative session. And it was just the thing. I mean, it was like it was happening that same day in January 2019, because that's what public affairs is like. We'll get unless we have a special session, which we might, but I don't think we will. I can't figure out what would have to crash for us for a special session to be required, and we're already close enough to the regular session. But the fact is that it will be so fresh legislatively in that concept, and we will be dealing with it real time, but we'll be dealing with it in the context of everything that we're doing today. What all that data means that will then be applied to making laws and changing laws and making an appropriations bill. And so everything we're doing right now counts, and it will be really fresh, and it will be a giant freaking emergency in January 2021.
Okay. Well, and I think that's important for our members to keep in mind now, not so much that they need to be doing anything any differently, because we're already doing the important work, but maybe making note of things and communicating what we're finding. TCCTA is a good network to disseminate that through. So please keep us posted as you're going through this. If there are things that we need to know and that your peers around the state need to know, that's really the role that we need to play. So Beeman, we were talking yesterday about this Senate Bill 944 having to do with what is public information on private devices. That was a bill out of last session, had really nothing to do with us in particular, that we weren't what was on their minds when they were dealing with it, but it might have some implications for us now in this online environment. Can you talk with our members a little bit about that?
Sure. Senate Bill 944 was a bill. It was sponsored. It was a bipartisan bill. It was sponsored by Senator Kirk Watson and Representative Capriglione, who's a Republican in the House side. It's sort of an interesting bill because it didn't change the open meetings, open record laws per se. That the idea of what constitutes public information, the actual thing itself, was not changed, nor were the requirements for people, regardless of how they are exchanging information. What it did was it tried to create some uniformity and some structure around the use of private devices in public information. As we all know, the standard used to be, 15 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, the standard for communications devices was your company bought one for you, and a lot of people did not have private cell phones. That has radically altered, and really from the sort of introduction, I guess, of the iPhone in 2007, where the thing became a lot more part of your personal life. Smartphones have made it such that most people now use private devices that they have a contract and they pay for it monthly, and they use it for everything. They use it for work, they use it for play, they play play solitaire on the thing, they FaceTime with their children with it, they record their cat with it, and they send emails about their students and about things related to the institution that are public information. And so,
And when you say public information, you mean subject to open records?
correct.
Okay.
That there are things that we do working for public institutions that somebody can come and say, I am going to make an information request for everything that has to do with the establishment of a certain kind of course, right? And you say, okay, well, me and the associate dean have been pinging back and forth like that, and I've been doing it from wherever, including at home. It turns out that suddenly is public information that somebody is demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the bill did was the bill created something called a temporary custodian. And the temporary custodian is you, Richard. If you and I worked for a college and we were communicating about something that in our official capacities as employees, and we have that stuff on our private device and it's not known by or part of the big database of our institution, we have become temporary custodians of that information, right? And so we have some duties as temporary custodians. One of them is to either remit that information, send the substance of or the actual text that we're talking about to our institution for inclusion in the general publicly discoverable database of our institution. Or we need to cache it ourselves and make sure that we keep that in a place where if it gets demanded of us, we can make it happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can, so that you have a file or a folder or whatever the case may be, where you are able to produce that information. This was, as Richard alluded to, this was really more about things like city council meetings and contracting issues related to city council. This bill was sponsored by the associations of broadcasters and the associations of newspapers around the state, because they felt like there were times when they were investigating or trying to get information and somebody was saying, in fact, there was actually a lawsuit 3 or 4 years ago where a county commissioner from Bexar County actually sued to keep from having his information discovered because he said if it's on a private device, it's not discoverable. And he won in district court, and then that was overturned by the appeals court, which created where we are now.
And that sort of scenario can happen if someone is trying to keep something under the table and doesn't want it to be discovered. So they're actually trying to circumvent the spirit of the open records. Or it can happen because, hey, it was Saturday evening, I was at home and I just texted my boss or someone who works with me at the institution. I didn't think twice about it, but now I've got this thing. So in that case, you have also gone around the spirit of the Open Records Act unwittingly. And so this is saying you need to be aware that there's exposure there, and there won't be any ambiguity as to whether it's subject to open records.
Correct. And what this does is two things. One is it recognizes that we use our private and public devices interchangeably. We just do, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't say you're not allowed to do that on a private cell phone, because then every business in Texas has to buy, or every state agency has to buy everybody a cell phone, and you have 2 of them, right? The red one and the green one, for your thing. But what it does say is it says we can't create a situation where you can game it by saying, private device, I'm immune. That's just not right? It's not correct. It's not part of the spirit. So what this does is it's actually a protection for employees, in that it keeps you, it's a reminder that you shouldn't delete things off your private phone that may actually be part of a public record. And then somebody else references that conversation, and they say, okay, we need to see that conversation. You say, I deleted it. You've destroyed public records, right? And so what this does is it creates a this creates a record. Here's what's interesting about it in the context of this conversation related to COVID is nobody expected this bill to be beta tested the way that it's being beta tested right now.
Mhm.
That everybody went home and the vast majority of what's happening in our public sphere right now is being done on cell phones and home computers,
Mhm.
which is really amazing. That is just an absolutely stunning thing. And so the admonition we would give to everybody is, one, check in with the public information officer at your school and say, how are we dealing with this? Because now I'm doing everything virtually at home, maybe on a school computer, maybe on a private computer, whatever, but it's not just automatically dropping into those spaces that it normally drops into. And two, what are my requirements? How do I cache this or whatever so that I can give it to you? You're not required to divulge that information. You're required to have it so that if somebody asks for it, you can send it to your PIO within 10 days. So if you're having this conversation on a private device, just save it, put it in a place that you know where it is. And then if the matter comes up, you can put it there. Some institutions have requirements, right? Some institutions say we have a database for our institution. So it's in there and we know if you guys are doing something or talking about students or whatever it is, give us that put that information on our system. Some have those systems, some don't. In any case, just be aware that that bill is out there and be aware that it is being used beyond all expectation.
Mhm.
Private devices are being used by public entities now. And you should probably ask yourself a few questions about it. And we have a link, there's a Q&A that the Texas Municipal League did on this that I thought was pretty good. It's again a little geeky, and I apologize, but it has some back and forth about the background of the bill. It has some back and forth about how it didn't change the law, but it creates a framework to be able to adhere to the law. And then some of the court cases that led to this need for clarification.
If
Uh,
if you could share that link, we'll put that up in the comments as well.
Yeah,
And
I believe I sent it to Katie a little bit ago, so I
Perfect.
think she has it. And we can get that up there. Yeah.
if anyone finds that that's an issue at your institution or something your colleagues need to know about, be sure to talk with your public information officer, perhaps your HR department. There might be some training for employees so that everyone will be up to speed on what those requirements are. I know you've got a million other things to deal with, so this may not be the top of your list, but it might jump to the top of the list at some point. So be aware of it. Use some prudence now, just as you're going about your life. Fortunately, it doesn't really require you to do anything in addition to what you're currently doing beyond just preserving things, making sure you're not destroying records that might have might need to fall into the public domain. Beeman, we just have just a few more minutes here, and I'm thinking about the time frame that our members is on, which is just a mad scramble, and they're getting their feet under them to finish out this semester, moving classes that were not intended to be online, and that's what they're dealing with. But at some point, either late in the semester or at some point this summer, they may have opportunities to communicate with legislators. And legislators are home in their districts right now, dealing with this crisis, witnessing how their district is going through this, what the impact it's having. And in some ways, it could be really valuable for your legislators to know now, or let's say this summer, what it looks like on your college campus, so that next legislative session, when they're thinking about all this, they're going to say, yeah, I was on the campus of Brazosport College one day, and I remember talking to faculty there and to students there, and I get it. And it's going to be more powerful if they see it while it's still fresh and happening. So while that may not be something you can get to next week, it may be something that you can do soon. And so, Beeman, while we have you, I wanted to ask you, what's the message there? What if you had an opportunity to talk with your legislator, let's say in early June, what would the message be, and how would you make it?
Well, I mean, if it's true, and I have every
tell the truth. Yes, yes.
I have every confidence that it will be true. Tell them what we do. Tell them that we're flexible. Tell them that we were able to, what we were able to accomplish in this semester under grievous, frankly, circumstances. What we are working on for the future to be able to be nimble and flexible, because nobody knows which way this thing is going, and nobody knows if we're going to have successive waves that lead to successive lockdowns, and nobody knows, right? And so the question is how are we being responsive to the community and to our mission to the state? This is always our message, right? The message that we have in COVID is no different than the message we have all the time, which is our value is how responsive we are to our communities. Our value is that in responding to our communities, we're also accomplishing the big policy purposes of the state and the nation, and in my opinion, civilization, by doing higher education, right? And so what the COVID thing is not a change in any of that. What the COVID thing is a test of whether or not we can keep doing that under absolutely difficult and again, and this is a thing that I think is important. I look at right now, just by virtue of what I'm having to do for work and that kind of thing, I look at real-time statistics all the time about this disease and what it's doing. And the bottom line is, this is an illness that is ravaging individuals and families. People are dying, and notwithstanding, our systems work is tremendously important, and our infrastructure work and our looking past this to what it's going to be like is important. Keeping that in simultaneous tension with the reality of what this thing actually is important too. And so part of what we do in the community and in community colleges, and boy, I'm not telling, I've learned this from your members, I'm not telling them about it, is that you know your students, and you may be the best thing in their life right now. And that's part of this story too. Part of this story to legislators and to anybody else who will listen is that's why community is important. That's why we call ourselves community colleges, because that's what we are. And beyond all of the mechanics and metrics of how we continue higher education, that absolute fabric of the community connection that we have with people is really important. And don't be afraid to talk about it, because it's really an important thing.
And telling that story, I think, is valuable, because if you work in the nursing program at your college and you're talking with the people in the medical system or systems that you interface with, you're going to be there as their system is being stress tested, just like ours is. And there's a story to tell there, that when they were under stress, here's what we were able to do for them, and that's going to be important. But equally, if you teach English or geology or art history, and you have students who are struggling to find an internet connection, and you as a faculty member or your institution helps them do that and keeps them engaged, then that's a story that needs to be told. If you teach in a prison system, I've been talking with some people who work and teach in prison systems now. That's a particular population that's being affected by this. And there's some really creative solutions that are being developed in those environments. Remember those stories and share them. Tell your legislators that when this was happening, here's what it looked like on the ground in your community, that your constituents were affected by this, and your institution was a part of that solution. tell us about it too. It's inspiring for me just to hear what y'all are doing. Also, we want to help spread the word about what's working, because if you found a solution for your students, there's probably a college halfway across the state that needs to know about that. And so there's a lot of value in sharing and keeping those lines of communication open with each other, with our elected officials, and with our communities. It's going to be one of those stories that comes out of this whole experience. Beeman, I want to thank you for your time today and your work on behalf of TCCTA. It's good to know that we've got someone in Austin helping close that gap and make sure that that connection is happening with the people in Austin that need to know about it.
No, sure, my pleasure, and just appreciate the chance to talk to y'all who are out there doing the good work.
Members, I want to let y'all know the faculty fellows are getting the first shot at this this new program with the TCCTA meetup program that we're starting next week. So be looking at probably tomorrow for an email from Katie with an invitation to that. When you see it, go ahead and click through and sign up for one of the sessions. We want to get that going as soon as we can. I know you're pressed for time, but we're hoping that this will be one of the most valuable hours you spend in your week. So have a look at that and sign up for it. Let us know what you think of it. I also want to take this moment just to affirm the decision each of y'all made very recently to go into this calling and this career. Your students need you right now. Your state needs you right now. And I want to thank you for stepping up and becoming a teacher and doing the work that you do. You're helping Texas get through this, and you're helping your students get through it. So thank you for that. Let's keep in touch remotely at the first opportunities. I look forward to seeing you in person again when we're out there doing that again. And in the meantime, take care, be safe, and we'll talk with you soon.